Welcome back to the Markets and Leaders podcast. I'm your host, Lyndsay Malchuk. Now, this is where the suits get left behind and the real conversations happen. The kind that actually peel back the headlines and get to what is actually moving power and capital and markets. Now, we're living in a moment where geopolitics is no longer just the elevator music. It's in the markets. It is the market. It is the conversations at your dinner tables, in office boardrooms, and all over our screens. Power is shifting, and with that, supply chains are being weaponized. So energy, defense, mining, and capital are colliding in ways we haven't seen in decades. From Venezuela to Asia Pacific, decisions made behind closed doors are rippling straight through global markets, sovereign risk, and ultimately investor strategy. The question's no longer what is happening. The real question is who understands what it means and who is positioned for what comes next. Now, today's episode is not about headlines. It's about consequences and opportunity. Joining me today is someone who sits right at the intersection of geopolitics, of defense, and market intelligence. Lewis Black is a respected thought leader with deep insight into defense dynamics, strategic risk, and how global power shifts translate into real-world capital flows. Lewis understands how military decisions, trade restrictions, and geopolitical pressure points quietly reshape markets long before most investors realize what is actually happening. This isn't an interview. This is a conversation, a real-time breakdown of how power, policy, and capital are moving together. Lewis, it is great to have you, and I'm super surprised it's taken this long to get you on the podcast.
Well, I had a lot of other things to do. So, I mean, I'm happy I could slide you in for this. I apologize, I'm in a suit, but I have nothing underneath it, so I had to wear it.
Well, I mean, we're going to have to overlook the suit again, but the personality will come through no matter what because you're Lewis Black, so why don't we get right into it?
Okay, let's go.
All right, here we go. Now, Lewis, when we talk about Venezuela, most people immediately think oil, sanctions, and political dysfunction. But if we pull back and look at this through a geopolitical lens, what is actually happening right now, and why does this moment feel different than before?
Well, I mean, I'm by no means an expert, apart from anything except tungsten. But if I was looking at this as a rational person, of course, oil is a driving force. But the question is, where has the oil been going to, and where is it going to now? So, there's no such thing as, righteous involvement in anything. There's always a reason why you do things to the betterment of your side. So if we look at the whole strategic metals business, China exercises a great deal of control over many of them because they've established these supply chains over many years. But they're also a very large recipient of Venezuelan oil. Of course, no more. But so sometimes you have to find the pressure points in order to have an equal seat at the table, I think is the best way to put it.
I mean, that's well put, but let's build on that then. I mean, how much of what we are seeing is really about Venezuela itself versus the United States sending a broader message about influence in the Western Hemisphere?
Well, I mean, it's a neighbor, it's a neighboring country to the U.S. There's a lot of oil that used to come to the U.S. All the guys in Texas, all the refineries, they like that heavy crude. So it hasn't come here for many years. I think the way that they went and borrowed Maduro and his wife in the middle of the night sends a pretty strong message to pretty much everybody that nobody is not reachable. I mean, it was quite audacious if you think about it. I mean, it's not like he wasn't expecting trouble, Maduro. I'm sure when he went to bed at night, he wasn't just, making sure his ADT alarm was on and making sure the back door was locked. I would imagine that he had rather a lot of security, given that he's not the most widely popular person in the country or the region. The fact they were able to pluck him out of it, and next thing you know, he's enjoying the hospitality and the food menus here in Brooklyn. Certainly sends a powerful message to a lot of people. But I think the oil is a very important part of rebalancing, supply chains, because this is all about being able to feed manufacturers in the United States, because right now there's very little ability to do that.
Do you think that he actually had his Nike tracksuit all set out? Or because, I saw that he had one suit on one time and then he flipped over, he had another suit, and now all of a sudden the Nike stock is through the roof.
Well,
So
I have to be honest, it was fantastic product placement by Nike. And I think, but there was a whole bunch of football teams, soccer, that is, in North America, in Spain, that were rather disturbed, because that's quite a common look. So, I've got to be honest, I would have expected something a little bit more, less fashionable than, the traditional orange jumpsuit is one that comes to mind.
maybe pajamas?
But I tell you this
don't know.
now, as things go, free Nike's free Nike.
Free Nike's free
it's-
Nike.
It could have been a lot worse. I mean, even if you think about it, even when, they're taking this despot to prison, they're still advertising the United States by putting a great American brand on it.
Just do it.
It didn't do Adidas. It didn't do it Adidas. Yeah,
I didn't do it.
They went all American. He's wearing American head to foot.
Okay, we digress. Let's bring it back. So when a country with that level of energy and mineral wealth stays unstable for decades, Lewis, it raises a bigger question. What does that tell you about how power, resources, and control really work on the global stage?
Well, the problem is, when you have something that everyone wants, they tend to overlook poor behavior. We can look at a whole series of nations like this, Iran being one of them, formerly Iraq as well. Syria wasn't really, high on the list of places to go visit on your spring break. Russia, people tend to forgive the actions of these despots because they have something that you want, because you don't have an alternative.
So true.
So
true.
We are in many ways responsible for much of this poor behavior, because we tolerate it because, well, sanctions are a beautiful thing when you can get discounted oil.
So true. And they have the world's largest
Yeah.
resource.
I mean, they were sanctions, so their oil, so basically their customers were getting cheap oil.
Right.
Who wouldn't do that?
Who wouldn't be, right?
If you look at, all that dreadful ISIS and what they were doing in Iraq and Syria, that oil was finding its way to market as steeply discounted via, I believe, Turkey, allegedly. And, that's the terrible thing. When you have very few options of diversification, and even if you try and punish the actors, somebody else benefits from their poor behavior.
So then how do you think about this from a risk standpoint? Is Venezuela chaos to avoid, or one of those maybe rare setups where dislocation can eventually, create asymmetric upside for those who understand timing?
Well, this is purely my opinion, and my opinion is really me. I think to anybody except for me.
And that's what it's about.
But I would say that one thing I think the Trump administration has learned over the last 20 years is that it's all very well taking one despot out and then being left with total chaos in the country. There's numerous examples of this, whether it be Libya, whether it be Syria, whether it be Yemen, whether, you take Iraq, you topple these guys and you've got chaos. And they often say, better the devil you know. So it appears in Venezuela, they've taken the rather fetching Nike-wearing despot out and left despot number 2 in there with strict understanding that he could be, or she could be, also in Nike by dinner time as well. So it's really a kind of, because remember, despots aren't doing this because they're looking to take a seat in all eternity next to Nelson Mandela. This is about money and power. And if someone is allowing you to keep that, as long as you dance to their tune now, well, no harm, no foul. Someone benefits from it. the real, people who suffer the greatest, of course, which is always the case, are the people, the normal, regular, everyday people trying to make a living. They always bear the brunt of this money-making exercise. And you have to acknowledge that there's nothing you can truly do about that. Because, in fact, if you get rid of the despot entirely, you end up with even more carnage and more suffering. When you look at these countries in the Middle East, not exactly been a bed of roses since the Arab Spring, where we gleefully toppled governments at will and our whim, and then said, "Oh, it's time for lunch," and that was it, and we just left them to it.
Well, hopefully, it was a good lunch at least then.
Yes, the EU, they always like to start and like to finish. I suppose it's the Frenchman's view of making love. We thought we never finished.
Okay, Lewis, what I find interesting is that mining actually often gets treated as a footnote in the Venezuela story. Now, even though the mineral potential is actually massive there. So when you look at a rare materials and how strategic inputs, how important could Venezuela become if the geopolitical environment shifts? Not just with gold, but just
that's
with
like saying
mining.
Afghanistan. They've got lots of resources too.
Yeah.
The problem is Afghanistan. So a lot of these countries, I mean, look at lots of countries, DRC, look at countries in Central Africa, or even in Africa. The resources are there. Look at Myanmar. They have North Korea. They have resources. The problem is the despot factor. You see, he doesn't run things, for efficiencies because his unit cost is kind of, free. So it's there's no desire to update and to modernize and to be efficient because, if a dozen guys get killed next week in the mine, we'll get another dozen.
It's true.
And that, unfortunately, is the reality. It is as long as people profit from despots being in place, meaning, outside of the country through these resources, there'll never really be any change. And the argument and justification of no change is because change often brings even more chaos.
This is true. Well, you're going to have companies like, I remember working for Robert Friedland, with Ivanhoe Mines, and his mines were in Myanmar at that point. And seeing somebody that has so much experience and so much knowledge, I mean, that's kind of what you need in order to be successful in these kind of countries.
Yeah, but you have no legal system. I mean, you can do all this beautiful work, and then you wake up one morning, you're driving to work, you're going down to the mine, you're very excited, it looks beautiful, and you find the gate's a different color, and there's a new name above it. El Presidente's son's mine. It wasn't a catchy name, but it made the point. So it's just, so on that basis, why would you do it? You run that risk. Who are you going to complain to? I want to see the president right now. Oh, he's too busy in the mine with his son.
Mm-hmm.
So
now, do you run into any of those in any of your projects?
No, we don't work in jurisdiction. We like legal systems. I mean, it's true. Legal systems, transparency, democracies, it's not for the faint-hearted to work in them. There's a fine line between, serial killer tendencies or alcoholism in dealing with bureaucrats. You have to, understand that you're very often going to be in a situation where the person on the other side of the desk is quite frankly not even qualified to, in fact, open the door for you when you leave and when you enter. Even that they would struggle, they'll still open the door the wrong way. But the problem is that, ultimately they have a series of regulations that often contradict each other, being enforced by people who have not been put in that position because of their experience in that area. It's because they're on that bureaucratic treadmill of rotation as they elevate them. So they corkscrew their way up the pension levels. So it's frustrating, requires extraordinary patience. But ultimately, if you can get to the end successfully, you've really done something that nobody in their right mind wants to do. And therefore you have tremendous value in your business. And that even if the president's son wants it, it's going to have to write you a check. And that's
But
a big difference.
that naturally connects us then to the bigger conversation right now around reducing, we're going to say, reliance on China for critical minerals. How realistic is that in your view? And what does Venezuela fit, or where do they fit in that longer term picture from your point of view and what you had to go through with South Korea too? I mean, is there a resemblance in any of that?
Well, the question is, are the U.S. oil companies going to go in with their own money into Venezuela to rebuild the infrastructure, or are they going to take U.S. government money? My bet, and this is purely a bet, is that they'll want a nice, healthy contribution in some way from the United States government to mitigate the risk of going into a country that perhaps potentially in 3 years, when the Trump administration comes to the end of its tenure and the new government comes in, whether the same appetite or support for this venture into Venezuela remains. And then they're left at the mercy of the despot, who's just chomping at the bit at getting their hands, putting their son's name above the door. So that's really going to be the question. How involved is the U.S. government going to be? I mean, as Russia just pointed out a couple of days ago or yesterday, they reminded the U.S. that some of those assets belong to them. Ooh, because they bought and paid for them. And of course, U.S. says, what assets? So it's, this is a highly unstable environment that even if you, put the Nobel Peace Prize winner or whoever won the election in power, traditionally, there's the old adage that when the new lot come in to start stealing, it's very unstable.
Absolutely. Well, mining's no longer just about that supply and demand anymore. It's actually tied directly to national security. So, Louis, you've been through a ton of all of this. From your perspective, what do investors tend to still miss when they look at mining opportunities, maybe without factoring in defense needs and security-driven demand? I mean, let's go from there. Let's widen that lens even to look at Asia as a whole.
Well, if you're an investor, I mean, you've looked at the reserves, you've looked at the grades, you've looked at the management team, you've looked at the second time in the management team because the resumes look too good to be true. You have a third look and thought, well, okay, let's just assume that they're right. And then you've got to look at possibly the single most important factor if they're operating in a transparent or democratic jurisdiction, which is permits. There's no such thing as one permit. There are hundreds of permits for mine. Hundreds. Everything is permitted. In fact, there are layers of when you install equipment, before you can even dry commission it, you need a safety certificate for each piece of equipment to show the government that when you switch it on, it isn't going to create a black hole and we're all going to get sucked into infinity. So when someone's saying, oh, I got a permit, really? Show me the encyclopedia of permits that you have, because you literally need hundreds. The regulations, everything is regulated. So investors have to be very careful of people who run around saying, I've got a permit. Next step, we're producing. No, you're not.
Do those permits constantly have to be updated then too, or are they constantly
It depends
changing?
on what they're actually specific for. But with big regulation, it becomes the old expression, baffling with bullshit. And so I know I'm not going to say that on a podcast. I'll just say bullshit, and I'll leave out the baffling. But the fact of the matter is that it's very difficult for an investor who's not an expert in this field to establish whether these permits really give you a legitimate path to production.
Okay.
And I think trying as an investor to understand the regulations and the compliance that's required is very difficult. Or you could just go to Central Africa and pass a couple of envelopes around and you're done.
I mean, there's that.
But you run the risk of the president's son saying, you know what? I've always wanted to be in this business. But last week, son, you were a fisherman. Yeah, but this week I'm a miner.
This week. This is my flavor of the week.
This is what I'm going for. I'm a mining guy now. Fishing, that's boring. You get seasick and there's fish and they're slimy and they smell. I'm going to mining. Big equipment. I put things up.
It's going to be gold, gold, gold.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, let's really lean into this one a little bit further because China's restricted exports of dual-use items for military purposes to Japan. Now, on the surface, that can sound technical, but Why is this actually a big deal?
Well, theoretically, it already had that restriction. And the funny thing about, say, tungsten, if we're talking tungsten, is that what is dual use? So dual use is if what you're providing is being used in anything to do with military defense, because as China explained, they're a peace-loving nation, and so they don't want to encourage, this poor, violent behavior of the rest of the world. But the issue with things like tungsten and a number of other critical metals is that they're in everything. So if you're a manufacturer in Kansas and you're producing the wear parts for a brake system, for whether it be a plane, whether it be a car, a braking system, how do you prove that doesn't end up in a armored vehicle or a tank or a military aircraft? It's almost impossible. So China have come up. See, China also very much understands our regulations. They understand the handcuff these regulations place upon us. They also know that if they put a question like this, well, you have to lift your kimono and show us how you use it, where you use it, where it ends up, what they do with it, which of course creates an impossible data chain that you can't comply with because it would breach all kinds of national security implications. So you've set a barrier so high where you can legitimately say, well, we haven't restricted the export of tungsten. There's tungsten for everyone. Just fill in this form. The problem is...
And this one, and this one, and this one.
The form, unfortunately, is such that you can't actually fill it in without breaching your own domestic national security obligations. So that's how you essentially block the exports without actually being the bad guy and blocking it. I think I spent a lot of time working in Asia now, Korea, and I'm slowly getting used to the food. Kills everything, by the way. If you have a cold, one soup, done. Good for a whole season. I think you have to understand that we're quite, in the way that we address things, we're quite black and white in the West. And ultimately, what's happened with these export bans is exactly this: that they put an impossible bar to meet, an impossible hurdle to meet, but they can legitimately say they're not in violation of WTO rules by restricting the use of raw material. You just don't qualify to buy it. And your qualification is that you must clearly demonstrate that you are, essentially closely related to the Dalai Lama and his adoption of Buddhist peace. If you can do that, you may have some tungsten.
A little bit. But once countries start limiting access to materials and tech at the core of modern defense systems, what kind of signal does that send to allies or adversaries and markets all at once?
Well, this is the good news. The good news is that in the West, we love to live in denial. We find comfort and solace in, as long as we're told it's all right, we'll go with that.
I have no idea what you're talking about, Lewis. Nothing. There's nothing wrong. I'm fine. Everything is fine.
This is essentially the approach that governments have had to take with strategic metals. Because if you let your adversaries know that you don't actually have enough, say, tungsten to make munitions, it could be quite problematic for many diplomatic reasons. So if you say, no, nothing to see here, we're all good, then everything's fine. And I think the industrial base in the West is taking the view that someone's described this to me the other day. That it was like in that movie Trading Places, when the guy had been through all that misery and he woke up in his own bed and he said, whatever the name of the butler was, I had this terrible dream. That's my customers. They essentially think this whole moment is just, they're going to wake up from it any minute. The status quo is going to return like it never happened. Whew, thank goodness for that. Because ultimately, everybody except me, and of course, government, loved this unearned income or unearned margin that everyone was generating from cheap CCP material. Everyone loved it. Cheap material? Who wouldn't? Who wouldn't love cheap material? And, they were generating industrial margins significantly higher than any other industrial margins you'd find in other sectors because of these cheap raw materials. Their hope, I think, in many ways, is to let it die on the vine. Trump will be gone in 3 years, and then it'll be business as usual. Someone will ring up, say to Gigi, look, we're really sorry, big misunderstanding. What time's the shipment arriving? So now it's not going to happen, but you can live in denial and be very happy. And there's no difference here. You're just not going to be able to fix this, and you're not going to be able to fix it quickly. And you certainly can't acknowledge you have a problem, because that would be telling everybody, well, you screwed up.
So do you see this then as a targeted move tied to regional tension, or part of a broader shift where maybe supply chains themselves are becoming tools for leverage?
No, this is just business.
Just strictly business.
Just business. China.
How about from the defense side then? How quickly can countries adapt when these restrictions hit?
It's just business. It's just
That's
China.
it.
China spent billions. They've invested a huge amount of time and money in developing a supply chain, not for our benefit, but for theirs. They took the raw material supply chain over by buying market share, by crashing the price, drive everyone out of business, and all raw materials flow through us. Then we don't innovate, we replicate. Then we get particularly good at downstream products. 10 years ago, not so good. Now, incredible. As good, if not better than we can do here. Not innovative, but replicate, no one better on the planet. And then essentially what you're basically asking them to do is turn the taps back on to feed their own competition. That doesn't make any sense, because China's saying, well, don't worry. We're going to help the brothers out. We love you guys. You don't need to do it yourself. You can buy it from us. Look, I got a warehouse full of this stuff. Help yourself. And, there comes a point where, politically, you have a very difficult, I like to think difficult decision to make. Do you explain to people they can no longer buy $100 televisions for every room in their house because we're building a supply chain so that we are diversified? Or do you say, you know what, it's not ideal, but guess what? I've got good news. Get your TV, and we've got a plan. Can't tell you about it because it's national security, but we'll get back to you. So this is what I think. Trump administration is many things. And they cop a lot of flack because, it's a lot of noise. And they have to understand this is born out of how people do things in New York. You often, wave the left hand while the right hand is picking your pocket. And so there's a lot of diversions going on here. But I do honestly believe in the conversations that I've had with them, even though sometimes it's frustrating and it takes a long time and all these things. I do honestly believe that they genuinely think that they're going to have that conversation. There's private TVs right now. We've got to diversify. This is something which is absolutely critical, because otherwise, if you think they can cut off raw materials for this, egregious reason of fuel use, which you can't even prove, what happens when they say, you know what, television's bad for you, no more TVs? We did a study and we found that people who didn't watch television were much happier. We're going to give you a radio. You could listen to the radio now. And that's really what this comes down to, is the fact that the free market elicits choice. It's your choice. That's what makes the free market a beautiful and terrible place all at the same time. If you take that away, what are you left with? You're left with mediocrity. You're left with essentially inefficiencies. You're left with lack of choice, lack of dynamic thinking, creative thinking. It's just then becomes basically a treadmill from A to B.
So true.
It's
what becomes clear listening to all of this, Lewis, is that capital doesn't just disappear during geopolitical stress. It actually just reallocates. So where do you see capital quietly moving right now that most investors are not watching closely enough yet?
Well, I think there's obviously media capital, which is whatever's hot, everyone jumps into because everyone's looking for that bump. And once they think it's reached the top, everyone's out. GameStop, on a much larger global scale. I think what people are waiting for is a clear path of transparency, or at least a clear coordinated policy from the United States of how to address this issue. Clear, defined policy. Once that policy is revealed, then smart money, free market money can start to analyze how do we enact that policy? Because we know if there's a policy, there's support. And then, of course, this is going to be a disaster for most junior miners, because going back to my original expression of baffling with bullshit, nobody does it better than a junior miner. But now free market capital is going to look at this and scrutinize to a much higher level than, say, an ordinary investor like myself would be able to, or, for instance, a government would be able to. And government, I think, understands, as we saw in 2008 with Japan and South Korea when they tried to build these supply chains, and they lost billions. Lots of Canadians and Australians made a lot of money, but nothing came of it. Government may have great ideas, they're just not great at execution, especially in something as racy as mining.
So true. All right, Lewis, before we wrap,
okay,
let's tie this all together, and we're going to switch over to something lighter.
Okay.
I'm going to throw out a few statements. You're going to tell me if this is a real geopolitical signal or just noise. So we call this game politics or noise. Pretty simple.
Not very catchy, is it?
It isn't. Let's come up with a catchier name. What could it be?
Policy or crap?
Okay. Policy or bullshit?
That's it. Perfect.
Nailed it. Okay. Are we ready?
Yes.
Okay. First one. Export restrictions on dual-use materials will become as influential to markets as interest rate decisions. Policy or bullshit?
Policy.
Policy.
Yep.
Okay. Next one. Countries with unstable governments but strategic resources will define the next decade of investment risk and reward. Policy or bullshit?
Bullshit.
Tell me why.
Why? Because nobody in their right mind, unless you're a government with an army, is going to invest in a despot country.
Noted. Okay.
You have to be out of your mind. You literally be better off going to Vegas, walking up to a blackjack table, giving them your money, and not even sitting down to play. To be saving of all the pain and aggravation and just enjoy the free drinks.
I'm just here for the drinks.
Okay, exactly. You've got my money.
Next one.
Leave me alone.
Okay. Next one. Defense spending cycles are short-term reactions rather than long-term structural trends. Policy or bullshit?
Bullshit.
All right.
Defense is here to stay. We stopped defending. We're planning for defense at the end of the Cold War. We suddenly thought, like in Star Trek, that the Vulcans landed and we became a part of the Federation of Planets, and the world became this global utopia.
So good.
That was a bit
so
dumb.
Good.
Did you really think about
game.
But there we are.
There we go. And great analogy. Way to sneak in a little Star Wars there, too.
Star Trek. Oh, my goodness.
Part of me
You've just
Star
offended
Trek.
half
Sorry.
your audience.
I'm so sorry. I didn't watch either one of them. Sorry.
Oh, my God. You've offended everyone now who's listening.
I know. That's it. Fired. Lewis, it's been fun. Those are the 3 questions we have. I am so grateful that you were here. And this has been incredibly insightful conversation. So thank you again. And please come back to the podcast soon.
I will do. Thank you very much for having me.
Now, geopolitics is no longer something investors can afford to treat as background context, and conversations like this with Lewis Back from Almonty Industries will help you cut through the noise and get to what actually matters. Now, remember, these are the opinions of our own with possible vested interest in any of the companies we speak about. Always be sure to speak with a licensed financial advisor and know your own risk tolerance. This is not to be used as financial advice, and for a copy of our complete disclaimer, head over to Appeton.com. This is Markets and Leaders. I'm Lyndsay Malchuk with Appeton Media, where the headlines stop and the real market story begins. We will see you next time.